welcome to Series 2 of the Great British Quilter podcast. I'm Sarah Ashford and I can't wait to share with you my fantastic lineup of guests over the next 8 episodes. I'll be meeting with authors, quilters, shop owners and industry professionals to find out more about them and how they contribute to the world of quilting that we know and love. A huge thank you goes to Orifil Thread, who have generously sponsored this series and helped make it possible. Orifil is an Italian thread company specialising in superior quality cotton threads for professional and domestic quilters. With a wide range of threads in varying weights and a beautiful spectrum of colour, quilters can find the perfect thread for their project. Do visit orifil.com for more information. For this episode, I had the opportunity to speak to Fenella Dawney from the company Artichoke about the book Women Making History, Processions, Banners, which has just recently been published. Let me tell you a bit about the processions and the book to celebrate this momentous event. On Sunday the 10th of June 2018, tens of thousands of women wearing scarves of green, white and violet took to the streets in Belfast, Cardiff, Edinburgh and London as part of the Processions Project. It was a mass artwork to mark 100 years since the first women were allowed to vote in the UK. The book wonderfully captures this incredible event, with close-up photographs and background stories of all 100 banners that were processed through the cities. Fenella is an arts producer with experience working in theatre, festivals and outdoor events. She joined Artichoke in 2017 as associate producer on Processions and has since worked on Lumiere Durham 2019, Imminescence and Processions exhibitions. In 2016, Fenella produced Encampment for the Good Chance Theatre as part of South Bank Centre's Festival of Love. Uniting artists from across Africa, the Middle East and Europe, Encampment was a 9-day programme of free music, theatre, dance and talks by and in solidarity with refugees. Fenella was Arts and Culture Manager for the Great Get Together, a nationwide campaign created in association with the Joe Cox Foundation, and from 2012 to 2015 was General Manager and Producer of Belarus Free Theatre, going on to produce their 10-year anniversary festival, Staging a Revolution, in co-production with the Young Vic. I caught up with Fenella to learn more about the processions in 2018 and how these women came together to work creatively to have their voices heard on the banners that they processed through some of our nation's cities. Good morning, Fenella.
Hi.
Thank you so much for coming on the Great British Quilter podcast. It's lovely to have you.
Yeah, great. Thank you for having me.
So can you tell me more about the Artichokes Processions Project? What was the inspiration behind it and its connection with the First World War centenary and the women gaining the vote?
Yeah, so the idea originally came first from artist and creative producer Daryl Vidalingham, and he wanted to sort of recreate the processions organised by the suffrage movement at the beginning of the 20th century. So you may have seen images of, women moving through the streets, mostly wearing white. And the project was commissioned by 1480 Now, who are the UK arts programme for the First World War centenary. And they wanted to celebrate this landmark moment in women's rights as part of their final year of programming. And the campaign for women's suffrage, in terms of how it was linked to the war, it had been building for decades, but World War I saw a massive change in women's roles and the perception of women. So with many men away fighting, women took on men's roles in factories and offices, and really they became about 37% of the workforce over that time. So women's contribution to the war effort was just one of the justifications for changing the law and allowing the first women to vote. So what we imagined was a single day of mass action across 4 political capitals of the UK, so Belfast, Cardiff, Edinburgh and London. And we wanted thousands of women to come together to celebrate the women that had come before them, the suffrage campaigners, but also as much to share their hopes and aspirations and calls for change in the future.
And so you had over 100 groups in total across the country, didn't you, invited to make banners of their choice, expressing their hopes and their wildest dreams for this fantastic procession. And women were involved through the arts and community organisations. How did you get so many women involved? I mean, that's a huge feat, isn't it, in itself, to organise something on such a large scale?
Yeah, so we had the ambition that processions would be a portrait of women from all corners of the UK, and we wanted all women to feel welcome to take part in the events. We wanted thousands of women to come. So our main challenge was geography and sort of disseminating the invitation to take part to as many different women as possible. So we put together an engagement strategy which centred on, as you mentioned, these 100 groups across the UK. They were sort of our geographical lightning rods. And from them, we would try to reach as many women as possible. So I approached arts organisations and charities who I felt had a really strong connection with their local community and who could find brilliant artists to work with. And we also made sure that we had groups that were geographically disparate so that the reach of the project was as wide as possible. So we had a group in Stornoway, we had one in Cornwall, and across every corner of Scotland, England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So these 100 groups became the background of our engagement strategy, and they helped get the message out locally through their own marketing and social media. We also employed 5 brilliant national coordinators who worked within those countries to build grassroots engagement in the project. So they went to events, conferences, coffee mornings, festivals, and reached out to women and invited them to take part, either by making banners or by coming on the day, or both. And then we also did, alongside that, a huge marketing and media campaign with ambassadors such as Kanya King, Saoirse Monica Jackson, and Dr. Helen Pankhurst, as well as organisational ambassadors, which included the Women's Institute and Care International, Girl Guiding, the LGBT Foundation, among others. And all of these different people and organisations helped us as well to get the message out as far and wide as possible. So each country had this capital city that they could come to, and we had loads of ways of reaching people wherever they were.
Oh, fantastic. And what a diverse range of women you were able to recruit as well.
Yeah.
So can you tell me more about some of these groups and how did they work collaboratively to create their banners?
So we wanted the groups to represent very different demographics of the UK. We encouraged our partner organisations to take the opportunity to engage people in their communities who they may not have worked with before or who may not already be part of their core audience. We were also really aware that in 1918, only women over the age of 30 who owned property got the right to vote, which excluded many other women who didn't get full suffrage until 10 years later. So we wanted to engage organisations that worked with young women, women living in poverty, women with experience of homelessness, refugee women, LGBTQ plus women, women who had very different lived experiences. The event for us had to be seen to be for everyone and be inclusive of everyone. So the workshops became spaces where, over the shared engagement in the activity of banner making, women could come together and discuss what it means to be a woman in the UK today, what there was to celebrate, what they had in common or disagreed on, or what they felt they were still fighting for. And groups organised themselves often by utilising the skills within the group. So it didn't matter what your skill set was, or even if you'd never sewn before, there was always ways to contribute, either by telling your story or collaborating on ideas for the design or slogan or providing materials or stitching.
That's wonderful.
So much of it,
isn't it? You can be involved in so many ways, because a lot of people say, "Oh, I can't sew," or I'm hopeless with a needle. But there's so many other ways to contribute, and just bringing the women together to work on something collaboratively—that's a really powerful thing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So yeah, a lot of the collaboration came from just the first workshop sessions where they were talking about their own lives and making connections with each other, which was really lovely.
And did you get a chance to work with any of the groups at all? Did you go in and see the banners being made?
Yeah, definitely. I did. I was lucky enough to visit a few of the groups and take part in the banner making workshops. One group that I really enjoyed visiting was we invited an art collective called Hex to create a banner with participants from Welsh Women's Aid in Cardiff. Mm-hmm. So the women who took part in that workshop were all survivors of gender-based violence, but most of them had never met each other before, and they were really different ages with really different life experiences. And it was really great to see how the artists from Hex, who are Jessie Curtis, Phoebe Davies, and Sarah Smith, immediately put everyone at ease, and how quickly that group became a unit. And they spoke really passionately and clearly about what being a woman meant to them and how far we'd come and how far we still had to go. And so I felt very privileged to be in that space and to collaborate with them on their banner. In the end, they chose the slogan, "We see your gentle threats." And they wrote a full manifesto. Yeah, so they wrote a full manifesto, which was incorporated into the background of the banner, which is kind of amazing that they, did so much work into that. And it's a really powerful banner, and it comes straight from the heart. But then I also went to visit Women for Refugee Women workshop, which was led by an artist called Jess Walls. And she was teaching women who were in the process of seeking asylum in the UK different stitching techniques. And that was really fun because some women already knew how to sew and knew how to stitch, but for some it was the first time. And I learned with them as well because there were lots of techniques I'd never come across. And so we all worked together on that, and it was lovely to be with the women in a kind of environment that sort of transcends language barriers. And they each embroidered a flower which represented their country to decorate their banner, which had the slogan, "Liberty, Safety, Dignity," which were still things they're still fighting for, of course.
Of course, yes. And I imagine through these collaborative efforts, friendships were formed. I mean, they were, they had so much in common with each other, and having the opportunity to work together on a collective project, I imagine that, the friendships extended beyond the processions ultimately, which is great, bringing women together who, like-minded women who have had shared experiences.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we heard really lovely stories of new friendships formed. I always remember a story, I can't remember which group it was, but of a woman who was too sort of elderly or infirm to go to the event herself, but the bus taking the group off to the event stopped by her house so that she could come out and hug them all and wish them well on their way to the event. So it was really lovely friendships, and it's great seeing, especially online, the hashtag still being used and people every year on the anniversary still remembering and saying how wonderful they thought it all was.
And maybe in 100 years' time or 98 years' time, another procession will take place, and I wonder how far things will have changed for women then.
Yeah, I hope so.
And so you also commissioned 14 artists and designers to make banners as well. So who was involved with this?
Yeah, so we had 4 designers. They included Dame Vivienne Westwood, Holly Fulton, the designer Roxander, and also Anya Hindmarch. They all created their own banners for the London event. Roxander worked with women from the Old Bailey, including one of the first female judges of the UK, which was a really amazing group. And after meeting with them, she made a banner which depicted Pomeroy's sculpture of Lady Justice, who stands on the top of the Old Bailey dome. And they used the words on it, "without fear or favour, affection or ill will," which represents the judicial oath that you need to take. So that was particularly poignant because in 1912 and 1913, Emily Davison and Emmeline Pankhurst stood in the dock in Court 1 of the Central Criminal Court, known as the Old Bailey, and declared to the world what they were doing and why. So that was a kind of amazing banner. We also commissioned 10 artists, which included Claudette Johnson, who worked with women living with mental health issues, Jester Walls, who I mentioned, Omema Madawi Rowlings, who worked with both hearing and hearing impaired women from Brighton, Sarah Joy Ford, who brought together the Republica International Women's Football Team with the LGBT Foundation to create a banner with the slogan "Love Football, Hate Homophobia," which is great. And then all the other artists, Sarah Maple, Sadie Williams, Heather Agyapong, who worked with Dulwich Academy, Rudy Lowe, who worked with Womankind Worldwide, Delane Labat, and the art collective Hex, who I mentioned before. So it was really great working with those individual artists and matching them with groups and seeing what came out of those collaborations.
Fantastic. And so I'm meeting with you today, and we're talking about this procession that happened a couple of years ago now, because a book has just come out celebrating the processions.
Yes.
And it's called Women Making History, Processions, the Banners. And I've had a copy of this book for a few weeks now, and I've loved looking through it. It's just so inspiring. And the images on the banners are just so powerful. There was one that, some of them jump out at you, and the one that jumped out at me was "Make More Noise," which I really loved. And then I looked, and then I could see that it was made in Somerset, which is where I live. So I thought that was quite a nice coincidence. So are there any banners in particular that stand out to you, that really resonated with you?
Yeah, I think it's so great that one jumped out at you, and then it represents your area.
Yes.
It incorporated glow-in-the-dark thread and Glastonbury wristbands in that banner. So It's quite a festival banner. It's really cool. There's loads and loads of banners that speak to me. I mean, for the same reason, maybe because I'm Scottish, one of the banners made by artist Alicia Hendrick was made with women from the island of Mull in Scotland, which is a place I know really well. And that one jumps out at me because it takes the shape of a sail and they held it up with oars, and it incorporates handmade fishing nets. So it's this beautiful sort of, makes it look like a boat. And on the banner, the island floats in the sea, and it says across it, "We know where we're going." With images of island women on the banner as well. So the group incorporated tweed and tartan and beeswax. So they were really incorporating the sort of fabric of the island into the banner. So I love that one. There's another one made by Artlink Hull with the artist Ella Doughton, who worked with young women from the Boulevard Centre in Hull. They cut out shapes of women that have this really great sort of honesty and dynamism to them, and the women hold babies and cooking pans, and they're shouting, "We want respect," but they're surrounded by this cloud of sort of gender-based sort of microaggression phrases. And the young women who created it from the Boulevard Centre have huge responsibilities in their lives, and for many of them, their trip to London for Processions was their first time out of Hull. So I think that banner has got so much heart to it and is just really dynamic. I love it. There's loads. Bedford Creative Arts banner made by Quilter Constance is like really punk. It's got loads of lycra and safety pins, and there's so many reasons to connect with these banners, from the story behind it or the message it expresses or where you're from. And they've done really well, all the groups, in terms of capturing our attention and telling their story. It's really great.
I can see from looking at the banners that so many different mediums and materials and techniques were used to make the banners. It was so much more than just fabric, wasn't it? Can you tell me more about that? Were they given free rein, or were there some guidelines?
So we were inspired by the artist Mary Lowndes, who founded the Artist Suffrage League, to create this banners and placards that were used within the suffrage movement. So she said this phrase, which is often quoted, which is, "Let us go then and make banners and let them all be beautiful." And the reason behind that was that the beauty of the needlework and the design and the colours were really important to sort of signify the women's virtue and their righteousness. And so the banners made for processions like those by Mary Lowndes were to be works of art that could stand the test of time. So we created toolkits with the help of Claire Hunter, who is a specialist banner maker and author of the book Threads of Life, which is an amazing book. And you could download these toolkits free from our website, and they're still available to download, I think. So the brief was that they should incorporate the colours green, white and violet somewhere on the banner. It could be a tiny stitch, it could be the whole banner in those colours, but just somewhere there needed to be this nod to those colours.
No, they had symbolic, weren't they? I remember reading, so it was violet for vote and green for, I've forgotten, remind me.
There's an anecdote where they're meant to represent the words give women votes, so green, white and violet.
That's it,
yeah, exactly. And suffrage campaigners would often wear those colours in their clothes or their jewellery as this sort of secret nod that they were part of that campaign. But so that was... we also asked them to back the banner in black or dark materials so that we could see them against the crowd, but that was it. That's the only thing that we asked them to do. Other than that, they had free reign. And within the toolkits, we gave an idea of how much it would cost to make a banner, and we gave some pointers in terms of design or inspiration, in terms of what shapes they might use or what symbols they might use, or, what colours mean. And we had a section on the history of the suffrage campaigners, which included an extract from the diary of one of the suffragist banner bearers, who was called Kate Fry, as well as photo collections from the LSE Women's Library and exhibitions that may be of interest. So we had lots of inspirational material that people could work from in order to create their banners, but really we gave them free rein.
And I think I remember reading and hearing about there was crochet on the banners and ceramics and applique and all types of wonderful creative ways to make these banners.
Yeah, absolutely. So the materials were extraordinarily varied. We had... British Ceramic Biennale used ceramics, as you say. They made loads and loads of these individual ceramic buttons that were sewn onto the banner, which was so fragile and heavy and beautiful. I mean, really amazing. Some of them incorporated 100-year-old linen or tassels that they found. So particularly groups from up in Belfast, Belfast known for its linen factories, they incorporated linen as well, and material that would have been around during the representation of the People Act in 1918. So that was quite amazing. And there were also stories of women farmers from the islands of Scotland, using the wool from the sheep and sort of brushing that and incorporating it as felt into the banner as well. So really amazing different kind of materials that represented very different places and people as well.
And a range of issues were represented in these banners, but there was also a real sense of celebration as well, wasn't there? One of the banners that I was looking at this morning was about women first. So the first woman that became a firewoman, for example, and they did a lot of research into the first women, and then that was reflected in their banner. So I thought that was fantastic as well. So it really was a celebration as much as anything else as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really was. And it was also educational. It was really important that these workshops had that element of not just creativity, but also discovery and education. And I was really struck by the story of the Scottish Refugee Council, who considered not taking part in the event, as most of the women they work with who are in the asylum system still don't have right to vote in the UK. So how could they celebrate women's suffrage when it hadn't yet fully been achieved for them 100 years after the 1918 legislation? So in the end, they put the question to the women they work with and went ahead based on them wanting to be part of the project. And then as they cut and sewed, they talked about what the vote means to them and about the exhaustion of the asylum system and the challenge of living in a foreign country. And some of the group didn't know about the suffrage movement before they began the project. So there was a woman there called Alina from Pakistan, who was a sewing machinist who everyone wanted her skills. And she said she was surprised to learn about the history of the suffragettes in the UK because it was so totally different from her cultural background and the history of women she knew. So that was really interesting as well. And that's one of the themes that came out of it, certainly, was people finding out about suffrage history for the first time and then getting really excited by the history of it. But other themes, there was lots of themes showing battles that still needed to be fought, for example, over microaggressions or period poverty, free childcare or control over bodies and that kind of thing. But you're right, many were really celebratory and positive. So we had the Edinburgh College of Art slogan, "Everyone is equal," or Golden Thread Gallery's "Trust Women," or Duke's Lancaster banner, which was "Stronger Together." And another of the themes that we suggested in our toolkit and which a lot of people took up were celebrating particular women. So as you're saying, there were these women first and women, first firefighter and that kind of thing. We also had the activist Olive Willis on one of the banners, which was wonderful. And Anya Hindmarch's banner was all about Margaret Calvert, who was the designer responsible for designing loads of the road signs all across Britain. And she subverted the classic men at work road sign and made it women at work. So the figures in a dress. So it was really funny and lovely ways of using sort of representations to get the message across. And a lot of people also used representations of self as well. So we had lots of hands being cut out and sewn to banners, or flowers representing people, or even like actual self-portraits. So on Rita Duffy's banner for the Institute of Conflict Research in Northern Ireland, members of the group posed for a photo that was created by the artist into a digital reimagining of the birth of Venus, with symbols representing their responses to economic independence, employment, domesticity, sexual reproduction and pollution and all these things. So there was, lots of themes coming out which, were fighting for their causes, but also celebrating being women really today, which was really lovely.
Oh, fantastic. And some of the banners were made by women in prison, and who I believe the women in prison don't have the right to vote if you're in prison.
Yeah.
I'm particularly interested in that because I've taught in prisons myself, and my first guest this series was Tracy Chevalier. She's an author and she's also a patron of Fine Cell Work, which is a charity that goes into prisons and teaches prisoners needlepoint and stitching, and they create the most beautiful cushions and pillows and tapestries, which are then sold, and then they receive some monies for their work. So it's a great charity. And Tracy ran a project called the Sleep Quilt, and she was working collaboratively with them they were stitching their thoughts and their feelings about sleep in prison, and it was all put together into this collaborative quilt called the Sleep Quilt, which was really very powerful. It was great. So you did a similar thing in that the women prisoners came together and made a banner.
It was really important for us to work with women prisoners because obviously hundreds of suffragettes were sent to prison and many went on hunger strike and survived the torture of being force-fed. And it's interesting actually because when women survived their prison sentences, they were given medals for valour by Emmeline Pankhurst, which was one of the ways that she sort of ennobled their physical and mental sacrifices that these women were making for the cause. So being incarcerated was a huge rite of passage for many suffragettes, and we really wanted to work with women who had lived experience of the criminal justice system, particularly, as you say, as they still aren't eligible to vote. So we had lots of groups working with women in prison. One of them was Historic England, who with London College of Fashion and Lucy Orter, the artist, worked with women from the Making for Change programme at HMP Downview. And that programme was founded in Holloway Prison, which was obviously one of the most notorious sites associated with the suffrage movement in London. And their group connected participants with the legacy of the suffragettes in Holloway Prison through the banner making. So they made 10 banners in total, which was amazing. And then after the events, those banners went on to be exhibited across the UK. So they were exhibited at the Icon Gallery in Birmingham, for example. We also worked with Clean Break, who worked with women with lived experience of the criminal justice system. Their banner grew from a series of collaborative workshops centred around votes, voice, women, and those who were excluded from voting. So they discovered the slogan from 1918, which is voteless, not voiceless. And they decided to reuse that on a piece of 100-year-old linen, which was dyed in the colours of the suffragette movement, which was really beautiful. And they also did this other element to their banner where they incorporated gestures which they created in a theatre exercise about power to create a dance piece to accompany the banner at the event. So they had this amazing dynamic dance that went with their banner, which they recorded actually at the event in London, which was really beautiful. And a lot of the women in prison who contributed to the banners that were at the event obviously couldn't be at the events themselves. So there was this sense of representing women who couldn't be there because they were incarcerated. And that was really important as well. So yeah, we had lots of groups working with those women, which was fantastic.
So can you describe the atmosphere on procession day in those cities? I've watched some videos on YouTube and it looks like a wonderful day of celebration and coming together and really, embracing all that it means to be a woman. There was children there was elderly women there. It was everybody. It looked amazing.
Yeah, it was such an extraordinary day. And we were so lucky because it was sunny. Yeah. All across the UK, it was this blazing sunny day, which was absolutely amazing. But
I think 100 years ago, it was muddy, wasn't it? And they called it the Mud March.
Yeah, you're right. So we were
lucky that you didn't have to endure that.
Literally shining down on us for luck. But so the ambition was to create this single unifying moment, and definitely that's what happened. I mean, the atmosphere was electric. It was really joyful and uplifting. And in London, where the BBC broadcast live from the event, they made sure that all the camera operators along Whitehall were all women as well. So there was this, women on the march noticed that, and there was this real sense of occasion and celebration. I was actually up in Edinburgh, which is where I grew up. So that was really particularly poignant for me. And we had our meeting point on the Meadows, which is a sort of grassy park within the city. And it was this amazing atmosphere. We had, as you say, women of all ages coming together, and they came together in a way that was so equal and honest, and they were all showing each other their banners and admiring each other's banners and what they'd made. And it was great. I was at the start and gave the women the signal to set off, which was such an extraordinary moment. And in Edinburgh, we were accompanied the whole way by a woman called Louise Marshall, who's the Lord Provost's private bagpiper. And she led the procession the whole way through the city. And she was honestly wearing heels that were a couple of inches high and going down quite cobbled streets for a lot of the route and playing bagpipes the whole way, which is really strenuous work. And everyone was so buoyed by her, extraordinary playing, and everyone was singing, and she took requests. And it was just really, really wonderful. I can't remember another day like it. And it's, again, lovely seeing women all this time later still reposting their photos, talking about going with their granny or their daughter, their daughters being engaged with women's suffrage for the first time through this event. It was really amazing.
Really memorable day by the sounds of it. It sounds absolutely wonderful. And all of the participants were given scarves, weren't they, in those 3 symbolic colours? So how did that idea come about, and what was the impact of that?
So the idea was that these scarves would be given to each woman who was taking part, as you say, in the colours green, white and violet. And the women were allowed to wear them in whatever way they wanted. And from the air, the women would be moved into rows, and from the air, they would look like one enormous banner, river of colour flowing through the streets of each city. So on the day, we gave out scarves to each of the women. So people could, if you were in a group of 5, you could all take purple or you could all take white and stay in your group. And then we got women to move through different lanes. So we had the green lane, the white lane and the violet lane. And as they came out, they were in these 3 lines of colour that flowed through the streets, which was really beautiful. So we sourced 400,000 scarves.
Wow.
And sourcing the scarves was the brainchild of our production assistant at the time, who's a woman called Geetanjali Sayal. And her mother used to run a small boutique in her house in India 15 years previously. And she still had friends and connections within that industry. So the fabric was sourced from several different locations across India, including Rajasthan and Gujarat. And then they employed 150 women and 100 men to cut and sew the scarves. And because there was no middleman, we could ensure that everyone was paid fairly for their time. And it was lovely seeing the photos of those women and men making the scarves and getting, involved with the story of what was going to happen. It was quite difficult to explain exactly the context of it, because it must have felt like such an abstract idea to them. But we sent photos back so that they saw exactly where all their hard work went in the end. It was really amazing working.
And there's a little story, isn't there, in the book about how the scarves were made in India, and that's really
exactly nice. An interview with Kate telling you about all that work.
Yes, and how lovely to have that connection. It was someone who was involved in the project, and then her family was sort of brought on board as well. I just think that's lovely.
Exactly, and they all flew over for the event in London. So we met them all. Yeah, it was really wonderful having them with us. I mean, if we wouldn't have been able to do it without them, so it was amazing.
And so is Artichoke working on any projects right now that you can tell us about? And has the pandemic impacted plans in any way?
Yeah, I mean, I think the pandemic is impacting everyone, and particularly, the arts industry. We're beginning to plan for Lumiere 2021, which is our biennial light festival that takes place every other year in Durham and attracts hundreds of thousands of people. So the pandemic is definitely a new factor taken into account when planning.
Yes.
But we have a really super experienced team, and we work with experts in event production and audience management. So at the moment, it's about planning for every possible outcome. We have lots of other projects in the pipeline at the moment as well, which I can't necessarily speak about, but we're very proactive and busy developing new projects. And while the fundraising landscape is, I think, becoming more challenging, it's also a really interesting time. And it's forcing us to work in new and innovative ways, and to think differently about the art that we're making and how it's consumed and how it can be consumed safely. So it's an interesting time.
Yes. And I like to ask my guests to give 2 top tips to the listeners at the end of the interview. So I was just wondering whether perhaps you had any tips on community banner making, about coming up with the ideas, about stitching collectively. How would a group who wanted to work in a collaborative way go about it?
So I think the best banners are the simplest ideas done well. I think get a group together who are all interested in the outcome. It doesn't matter who they are. Don't worry too much about your differences or your similarities, and start with conversations. Start collaborating by finding moments or points of connection between you, and then that will lead to a message that you can all get behind and put on your banner. On a really practical sense, some top tips that we have in our toolkit, given by the brilliant Claire Hunter, who I mentioned before, is if your banner's large, make sure you have holes cut into it, that you incorporate it into the design, because otherwise you might blow away. So it's good. It's good to have holes that the wind can pass through the banner and not pull you away with it.
And this is learnt from experience, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing learnt from experience that Claire told me about was she would sometimes make a little pouch that she would attach to her belt on her trousers, and then you could rest the banner pole in that at hip height, without, dropping it to the floor when you got too tired, depending on how long these marches can sometimes be. And I thought that was so innovative and something I would never have thought of. So that was quite clever as well.
You actually need a rota for sharing the carrying the banner as well.
Sharing the load. Yeah, if you've got enough people, that's a good way as well.
Yeah, that's it. Well, thank you so much, Fenella. It's been fascinating talking.
You're welcome.
Really enjoyed it. So all the best with your future projects, and I hope that you can get things off the ground in these tricky times, and I look forward to seeing what you're doing next.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It was so lovely to be here. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you once again to Orifil Thread for sponsoring this episode. We hope you have enjoyed it, and we would love it if you would rate, review and subscribe to the Great British Quilter podcast. There's also a brand new Great British Quilter Facebook group where we can all get to know one another, share inspiration and join in challenges. Plus, there will be giveaways and exclusive special offers, so we hope to see you there.